Hi and welcome to Crab Recap. Today I will tell you about a movie called Demon 79. This is the last episode of TV show called Black Mirror. The episode is set in a small town in Britain called Tipley in 1979. A young South Asian woman named Nita Hook wakes up in her apartment and gets ready to start her day as usual. She gets out of her flat and drives her small car to work. Nita works in the shoe department of a local department store called Possett's. Her lunch break is interrupted by her coworker, Vicky, who wants Nita to cut her break short to deal with a customer. Aside from being selfish, Vicky is also a xenophobic racist who makes a foul gesture about Nita's biryani lunch. The customer Nita has to serve is a man named Keith Holligan, who is infamous in the town for the death of his wife. Everyone thinks he killed her, but the judge ruled it as manslaughter. While Nita serves him, Keith is acting flirtatious in a creepy way. He tells Nita that he can only afford the shoes next week, so Nita offers to keep them aside from him. While she writes him the receipt, he tells her to write her number down as well, which causes Nita to choke him. However, it's just her imagination, and she gives him the receipt before he leaves. Near closing time, Nita goes outside to watch a conservative politician named Michael Smart campaigning for Tipley residents to vote for him in the next election. Then, Nita buys fish and chips before enjoying them at home as she watches the TV. The group Boney M is performing their song live on TV, and she seems to like one member of the group. When Nita goes to work the next morning, she notices that someone had spray painted her front door. At work, Vicky made a snarky remark about Nita being unable to pull off a stylish red jacket that she has her eyes on. Nita's misery doesn't end there, because her manager, Mr. Duncan, gave her a warning about eating what he deemed as abnormal and smelly lunches in the storage room. As a twisted gesture of goodwill, he instead gave Nita the key to the store's basement, so she can eat her lunches there. Nita knows that she was warned because Vicky complained to Mr. Duncan, so she has another imagination where she bashes Vicky's head through the glass display. In the end, the passive Nita decides to eat her lunch in the basement. It's dark and dusty, like no one has been there in years. She sees an old table near the stairs and decides to use it to eat her lunch. While eating, she looks through some newspaper clippings from decades ago about some deaths and also a successful May Day celebration in Tipley. This creeps her out and she decides to leave, but her curiosity is piqued by a small drawer in the table. When she opens it, her finger gets nicked and bleeds a little. She continues, finding a small wooden talisman with a weird symbol carved on it. Some of her blood was smeared across the symbol, which gives her an uneasy feeling and leads her to leave, bringing the talisman with her. At home, Nita hears a sound when she's watching TV. She goes towards her bag to investigate and pulls out the talisman. Surprisingly, the sound of a man saying hello comes out from the talisman, prompting her to drop it to the table. After a pause, she picks it up again and the voice returns, saying that he's a demon named Gap who's bound to Nita because she anointed the talisman with her blood. Before he can finish his introduction, Nita screams and throws the talisman to the floor. Gap wants her to pick the talisman up, saying that they need to work together. She slowly does so, and Gap says that Nita must perform 3 human sacrifices over the next 3 days, or else the world is going to end. Gap wants to help her, but she must permit him entry. Nita doesn't want to, but after a barrage of pressure from Gap, she eventually says yes. The light in her apartment flickers off, and Nita notices a frightening demon form in the shadows of her living room. Seeing her reaction to his true form, Gap calms her down and shapeshifts into the member of Boney M that Nita is attracted to, complete with the white fur jacket and heels. Despite Gap's efforts to look non-threatening, Nita still seems scared and keeps repeating that she's dreaming or has gone insane. After assuring her that he's going nowhere, Gap reminds Nita that she needs to deliver 3 human sacrifices before May Day in 3 days. To convince her, Gap snaps his fingers and her eyes cloud over as she gets shown a vision of how the world will end without her sacrifices. Her whole flat and town are burning, and she's trying to escape, despite nothing actually happening in the real world. Eventually, Gap stops the vision, and Nita tries to escape, but he keeps teleporting in front of her in order to convince her. Nita runs outside and ends up by a canal before she finally acknowledges Gap's existence. While she tells Gap that she's not going to kill anyone, he makes a brick magically appear in her hands and tells her to whack someone dead. A man walking a dog approaches her from under a bridge and asks if she's okay, seeming unable to see Gap behind her. Gap says that the man man is the perfect victim since there's no witnesses. Nita still refuses to kill, so Gap says the man has been molesting his own young daughter, who will kill herself in a few years. He shows her the vision of the man doing it, which causes Nita to impulsively smash the man's head with the brick until he falls into the canal and dies. Upon running back home, Nita throws up due to her first act of killing. Gap casually tries to comfort her by saying that there's only 2 more victims to go, since the one line from the talisman has vanished. The next morning, the police received a missing person report from the dead man's wife. The detective Len Fisher comes with Officer Susie to the wife's house to receive the man's latest picture so they can investigate. Later that day, they discover the man's corpse. Meanwhile, Nita is moping around in her flat, and Gap reminds her that she's late to work. She scolds Gap and says that she's crazy, just like how people thought her deceased mother was. In an effort to comfort her again, Gap says that he's also new to this since it's his first assignment and that Nita is not a bad person because they need someone corruptible to do the sacrifices. Instead, she wants to report herself to the police, and Gap persuades her not to by saying that she'll technically kill millions of people by bringing the apocalypse if she doesn't finish the sacrifice. She eventually hangs up the phone and comes to work late. She spent the whole day with Gap recommending various people in the store to be their next sacrifice. She goes home, but Gap rushes her to make a decision on who to kill today. He shows her a news report about nuclear war on TV, saying that the apocalypse is already manifesting. They then go through her kitchen drawers to find a weapon, deciding on a hammer. Gap thinks that a drink might help her kill, and Nita goes to a pub to order strong drinks, despite never drinking alcohol before this. As she drinks, she spots Keith in the pub and decides to kill him. She hesitantly follows him out the pub, but he notices her, thinking that she wants to sleep with him. Nita plays along because killing him in his house will be easier, so they head there together. The house is a mess, and after Keith puts on a sexy song tape and strips, she finally reveals her hammer. However, Keith doesn't seem scared, saying that he figures he'll be punished for killing his wife eventually. While he's blabbering on, Nita finally strikes his head with the hammer multiple times until he's dead, just minutes before midnight. She grabs her hammer from the floor and tries to leave the house when she hears Keith's brother entering the house. She fails to escape when he spots her, and Gap tells her to kill him unless she wants to be caught by the police. After a fight between the two, Nita eventually kills the brother by stabbing a knife to his chest. She takes the knife and leaves the house. Back home, Nita is stressed from killing an innocent man, but Gap tries to cheer her up by saying that she completed the sacrifices. However, one line still remains on the talisman, so he calls Hell to ask why one sacrifice isn't registered. It turns out that Keith didn't count as a sacrifice because he's a murderer, so he's somewhat already a part of Hell. Nita is pissed by this revelation and blames Gap, but he says that if he fails his initiation task, he'll be cast out of Hell into a void forever. Nita seems to understand his fear, so she agrees to kill one more victim. Nita says she never wanted to kill anyone in her life, but Gap doesn't think so because she must have some dark force inside her to be able to summon him. Thinking of who pissed her off that day, they decide that the next victim should be Vicky. Then, just before they close the shop the next day, Mr. Duncan brings Michael Smart into the store to get him free shoes in support of his campaign. Vicky is tasked to help him, and she says she'll be voting for a publicly xenophobic party for the election. Michael tells Vicky that he's not openly xenophobic, but he's actually going to implement anti-immigration policies if he's elected, so Vicky says he has her vote. Nita overhears all this and asks Gap to show her Michael's future. Unwillingly, he shows that Michael will win the election and go up the political ladder until he turns Britain into a very xenophobic fascist country. Nita decides to kill Michael today, despite Gap's discouragement, since he'll bring many souls into hell in the future. Feeling good with her decision, she takes the red jacket she's been eyeing and leaves the shop with a confidence she never had before. Meanwhile, the police are investigating the Holligan brothers' murders, where Len finds a sexy song tape in the player, leading him to go to the pub where Keith was last seen alive. The bartender says that he saw Nita looking at Keith last night as she drinks, and the female staff tells the officers that Nita works at Possett's. Later at home, Nita discusses her plan to kill Michael tonight with Gap, who who is still persuading her to choose another victim. She is then visited by Len, who wants to ask her some questions about the murders. Nita lets him in, acting casually and lying about not remembering who Keith is, despite Len showing her the receipt she made for him a couple days ago. Len finally leaves her flat, and she goes straight to her car in order to intercept Michael on his way home. Len, who is keeping watch of her outside, decides to follow her. Nita notices this and speeds up until he is right behind Michael's car. Gap is still bothering her about her choice, so she tells him to go away if he doesn't want to help her, and he disappears. Nita slams her car at Michael's multiple times until he crashes into a tree. He's still not dead, so she grabs her hammer and approaches him. She whacks him a couple of times, but he's not dead yet. Then Len catches up to her and tells her to drop the hammer. After a minute, she relents and cries in Len's embrace as he gets her to drop the weapon. Nita is taken to the police station and questioned about the reason behind her killings. She tells the officers everything, but they don't seem to believe her. Even the talisman turned into a normal-looking domino piece. She anxiously watches the clock strike midnight, but nothing happens. The officers step outside to discuss Nita's condition. Then they hear sirens blaring. As they find out that the world is truly ending from a nuclear war, Gap reappears in front of Nita. She apologizes for making him fail his initiation, but he says it's all right. Instead, he offers for her to come with him into the void for an eternity together. Having formed a bond with Gap, she agrees, and the episode ends with them leaving the room hand in hand as the world around them burns. That's all for now. Thanks for watching. Write your opinion about this episode in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss new videos.